The reluctant arrangement rain drummed against the windows of Café Nouveau as Eliza Bennet hunched over her sketchbook, pencil moving in delicate strokes across the paper. The botanical illustration of a rare orchid was due to her publisher by week's end, but her mind kept drifting to the mounting bills at home and her grandfather's increasingly expensive medications. "Just one more commission," she whispered to herself, tucking a strand of copper hair behind her ear. "Just one more and maybe we can make it through the month." The cafe door swung open, bringing with it a gust of Seattle's notorious autumn wind and a man whose presence immediately commanded attention. Mason Gray, CEO of Horizon Technologies, stood dripping in the doorway, his tailored suit slightly dampened by the rain. Everyone knew who he was. His face had been plastered across business magazines and tech blogs for years. Eliza barely glanced up, too engrossed in the delicate shading of a petal. When the barista called her name for her refill, she hurried to the counter, sketchbook clutched to her chest, not noticing the puddle of water on the floor. The collision was swift and catastrophic. Her body slammed into something solid, a chest, sending her stumbling backward. Her sketchbook flew from her hands, pages fluttering open as hot coffee splashed across an expensive-looking suit jacket. "I'm so sorry," Eliza gasped, horrified as she stared up into stormy gray eyes that seemed more annoyed than angry. "Do you know how much this suit costs?" Mason's voice was controlled but sharp. "No, but I'm guessing it's more than I make in a month," Eliza replied honestly, dropping to her knees to retrieve her scattered drawings. "I can pay for dry cleaning." Mason paused, surprised by her candid response. Most people in this city either cowered or fawned over him. He knelt down, picking up one of her illustrations. "You drew these?" he asked, his tone softening slightly as he studied the intricate details of a Japanese maple leaf. "Yes, I'm a botanical illustrator," she said, carefully taking the drawing from his hand. "Again, I'm really sorry about your suit." Something about her sincerity caught Mason's attention. His day had been a disaster. His ex-fiancée Vanessa had leaked damaging personal information to the press after leaving him for his business rival, and his board was threatening to remove him if he couldn't stabilize his public image before their upcoming IPO. "What's your name?" he asked abruptly. "Eliza Bennet. Come have coffee with me, Eliza Bennet. I'll buy you a new one since yours is now decorating my jacket." She hesitated. "I should really finish my work." "I'll make it worth your time," he insisted, nodding toward a private booth in the corner. 20 minutes later, Eliza sat stunned, clutching her mug with both hands as Mason Gray outlined the most outrageous proposition she'd ever heard. "Let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You want to hire me to be your wife? For 6 months?" Mason nodded, completely serious. "A marriage of convenience. The board wants stability. The public loves a redemption story, and I need someone who isn't part of my world. Someone genuine." "This is insane," Eliza whispered. "Why me?" "Because you didn't know who I was when you spilled coffee on me, and you didn't try to flatter me afterward. That's rare in my experience." Eliza shook her head. "I can't just marry a stranger." $5 million. His words hung in the air between them. "Half now, half when the contract ends. Plus full medical coverage for any family members." Eliza's breath caught. Her grandfather's Parkinson's treatments weren't covered by insurance anymore. $5 million would change everything. "Think about it," Mason said, sliding a business card across the table. "Call me by tomorrow." The contract would start immediately. That night, as rain pattered against the roof of her small apartment, Eliza sat by her grandfather's bedside, watching him sleep. The decision weighed heavily on her heart. "What would you do, Grandpa?" she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. "Marry a stranger to save the only family I have left?" Her phone lit up with a text from the hospital, another payment reminder. By morning, she'd made her decision. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number on Mason's card. "Mr. Gray, it's Eliza Bennet. About your proposal." She took a deep breath. "I'm in," playing pretend. 3 weeks after signing the contract, Eliza stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of Mason's penthouse, gazing out at the Seattle skyline. The rain-slicked buildings glittered like jewels against the night sky, a view she still hadn't grown accustomed to, just like she hadn't grown accustomed to the weight of the platinum band on her left finger or the whispers that followed her at every public event. "Ready?" Mason's voice came from behind her. Eliza turned to find him adjusting his tie, looking every inch the powerful CEO in his tailored tuxedo. The private ceremony had been small and clinical. Just a judge, 2 witnesses from Mason's legal team, and enough paperwork to fill a library. No family, no friends, no romance. Just business. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, smoothing down her emerald gown. The designer dress had arrived that morning, along with a stylist, makeup artist, and detailed instructions on how to behave at tonight's charity gala. "Remind me which board members I need to charm?" "Johnson and Winters. They're the most skeptical about my lifestyle changes." Mason's expression remained impassive, but Eliza had begun to recognize the subtle tightening around his eyes when he was stressed. The elevator ride down to the waiting car was silent. Mason had made it clear from the beginning this was a performance, nothing more. The contract specified separate bedrooms, minimal physical contact, and absolutely no emotional attachment. Eliza had agreed readily enough. Romance had never been high on her priority list anyway. At the gala, Mason transformed. His hand rested casually at the small of her back. His smile came more easily, and he introduced her to everyone as "my wife Eliza," with a warmth that almost seemed genuine. She played her part too, laughing at the right moments, touching his arm affectionately, and looking at him with what she hoped passed for adoration. "You're good at this," Mason murmured as they danced, the orchestra playing something slow and melancholic. "My grandfather always said I missed my calling as an actress," Eliza replied, acutely aware of his hand on her waist and the faint scent of his cologne. "How is he doing?" Mason asked, surprising her with the personal question. He rarely inquired about her life outside their arrangement. "Better. The new treatments are helping." She looked up at him, genuine gratitude softening her features. "Thank you for that." Something flickered in Mason's eyes. Something warm that disappeared so quickly she thought she might have imagined it. "It's part of our agreement," he said, his tone professional once more. Later that night, when they returned to the penthouse, Eliza kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. "These shoes should be classified as torture devices." The ghost of a smile touched Mason's lips. "You did well tonight. Johnson's wife is completely convinced we're madly in love." "I guess I'm a better liar than I thought," Eliza said, a strange hollowness settling in her chest as she headed toward her bedroom. "Eliza!" Mason called after her. When she turned, he seemed almost hesitant. "The board is expecting us at the lake house this weekend." "For appearances." She nodded, already knowing what this meant. More pretending, more proximity, more confusion about where the act ended and reality began. Days turned into weeks, and Eliza found herself settling into a strange routine. Mornings spent working on her illustrations in the sunroom, Mason had converted into a studio for her. Afternoons learning the ins and outs of high society from Mason's personal assistant. Evenings spent at his side at various functions. Becoming increasingly comfortable with the gentle pressure of his hand on her back, the brush of his fingers against hers, the soft kisses he planted on her cheek for the cameras. It was during a dinner with Mason's closest business partners when everything shifted. The conversation had turned to past relationships, and everyone was sharing stories of first loves and heartbreaks. "What about you, Eliza?" asked Catherine, the wife of Mason's CFO. "When did you have your first kiss?" Eliza felt heat rising to her cheeks. She began, then faltered. "Don't tell me a beautiful woman like you doesn't have a story," Catherine pressed. Mason, sensing her discomfort, reached for her hand. "You don't have to answer that." But something about the genuine concern in his eyes gave Eliza courage. "Actually, I don't have a story," she admitted softly. "I've never been kissed. Not properly, anyway." A stunned silence fell over the table. Mason's fingers tightened around hers, and when she dared to look at him, the expression on his face wasn't pity or amusement. It was wonder. Later, alone in the car, Mason finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" "It never came up in the contract negotiations," Eliza replied with a weak attempt at humor. Besides, what difference does it make? This isn't real, remember? Mason was quiet for so long that Eliza thought he might not respond. Finally, he said, "Nothing about you is what I expected, Eliza Bennett." She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a complaint. Blurred lines. The Paris skyline glowed golden in the early evening light as Eliza stood on the balcony of their hotel suite. The Eiffel Tower rose in the distance, exactly as she'd always imagined it from the pages of her grandfather's old travel books. When Mason had announced that she would accompany him on his business trip to France, she'd tried to decline. It wasn't necessary for their charade, but he'd insisted the board would expect his new bride to join him. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Mason's voice came from behind her. He'd loosened his tie after a day of meetings, and something about seeing him slightly disheveled made Eliza's heart beat faster. "It's like stepping into a dream," she admitted. "Have you ever traveled before?" he asked, leaning against the railing beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Eliza shook her head. "Grandpa and I never had the money, but he used to tell me stories about Paris. He proposed to my grandmother here." Mason studied her profile, the setting sun casting a warm glow across her features. 3 months into their arrangement, and he found himself increasingly drawn to these small glimpses into her life, these moments when she forgot to maintain the professional distance they'd established. "Would you like to see it?" he asked suddenly. "Not just from the hotel balcony." Her eyes widened. "Don't you have meetings?" "They can wait until tomorrow." An hour later, they were strolling along the Seine, Eliza's eyes bright with excitement as she took in everything. The street artists, the boats gliding by, the couples walking hand in hand. Mason watched her more than the scenery, fascinated by her unguarded delight. "You're staring," she said, turning to catch him in the act. "You're different here," he observed. "More yourself." "Maybe I'm just a better actress than we thought," she teased. But Mason shook his head. "No, this is the real you. The woman who spilled coffee on me and didn't apologize for who she was." Something shifted between them then, a recognition that boundaries were beginning to blur. They continued walking, closer now, their hands occasionally brushing against each other. Neither pulled away. As darkness fell, lights illuminated the city. Mason led her to a small, intimate restaurant tucked away on a side street, where they shared a bottle of wine and really talked for the first time since their arrangement began. Not about business or appearances, but about their lives, their dreams, their fears. "Why have you never been kissed?" Mason asked softly, the question that had lingered between them since that dinner party. Eliza swirled the wine in her glass. "I was always the odd one, more interested in plants than people. Then after my parents died and I took over caring for Grandpa, there wasn't time for dating." She looked up at him. "Why does it matter so much to you?" The question hung in the air between them. Mason didn't have an answer, or perhaps he wasn't ready to admit it. Back at the hotel, the tension followed them into the elevator. Eliza could feel her heart pounding as they ascended in silence, hyper-aware of Mason's presence beside her. When they reached their floor, he hesitated before unlocking the door to their suite. "Eliza," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with something. "Yes?" "Nothing." "It's late. We should get some rest." His mask slipped back into place as he opened the door. But later that night, as a thunderstorm rolled over Paris, Eliza found herself unable to sleep. She wandered into the living area of the suite, surprised to find Mason standing by the windows, watching lightning illuminate the city. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He turned, and the vulnerability in his expression caught her off guard. "I keep thinking about what you said. About never having been kissed." Eliza moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "It's not a big deal." "It is," he insisted. "Someone like you, someone so genuine, deserves to be kissed by someone who means it." Her heart stuttered. "Our contract." "To hell with the contract," Mason whispered, closing the distance between them. His fingers gently lifted her chin. "May I?" Eliza's answer was to rise on her tiptoes, closing her eyes as his lips met hers, soft, tentative, and then with growing certainty. His arms encircled her waist, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming something neither of them had anticipated when they signed those papers 3 months ago. When they finally broke apart, breathless and wide-eyed, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "That wasn't in the contract," he murmured. "No," Eliza agreed, her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. "It definitely wasn't." As lightning continued to flash across the Parisian sky, they both knew they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The pretense was crumbling, revealing something far more complicated and far more real than either had bargained for. Broken contracts, morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of their Paris hotel suite, casting soft shadows across the rumpled bedsheets. Eliza stirred, momentarily disoriented until the memories of the previous night rushed back. Mason's lips on hers, the gentle touch of his hands, whispered confessions in the darkness. Her chest tightened with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. She turned to find his side of the bed empty, a handwritten note on his pillow. "Emergency board call. Back soon. M." Eliza traced her fingers over his handwriting, trying to decipher what last night meant for their arrangement. The contract specifically prohibited emotional entanglements, Clause 16.3, which she'd memorized along with every other condition of their agreement. But rules had been broken, and she wasn't sure where they stood now. When Mason returned an hour later, his expression was unreadable. "Is everything okay?" she asked, setting down her sketchbook. "Just business," he replied, his professional mask firmly back in place. The vulnerable man from last night had vanished. "We need to return to Seattle. The jet is waiting." The flight home passed in uncomfortable silence. Eliza caught Mason watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his gaze thoughtful and conflicted. But each time she tried to broach the subject of what had happened between them, he deftly changed the topic to safer territory. Upcoming events, her grandfather's health, the weather. Back in Seattle, the tension between them grew. Mason buried himself in work, returning to the penthouse late each night. Eliza filled her days with illustrations and visits to her grandfather, trying to convince herself that their kiss had been a momentary lapse, nothing more. Until the morning, she opened the door to find a courier with an envelope marked "Urgent" in bold red letters. Inside was a tabloid, the kind sold at supermarket checkout lines, with a grainy photo of Mason and Eliza in Paris. The headline screamed, "Tech mogul's marriage of convenience inside, Mason Gray's $1 million contract with wife." The article detailed their arrangement with alarming accuracy, from the initial meeting at Café Nouveau to the exact figure Mason had paid her. An anonymous source, who Eliza suspected was Mason's vindictive ex, had provided the tabloid with a copy of their contract. Eliza's hands trembled as she read. Her phone buzzed with notifications, journalists requesting comments, social media exploding with speculation, even her publisher questioning what this meant for her upcoming book deal. When Mason burst through the door an hour later, his tie askew and eyes wild, she knew he'd seen it too. "I've got my legal team working on it," he said without preamble. "They're preparing a statement denying everything. Would that even work?" Eliza asked quietly. "They have a copy of the contract." Mason ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "They could have fabricated it." "We'll claim it's fake." "So we keep lying." The words felt bitter on her tongue. "What else would you suggest?" His voice rose slightly. "My company's stock has already dropped 15% this morning. The board is in panic mode. And I'm just collateral damage, right?" Eliza stood, suddenly angry, not just at the situation, but at herself, for forgetting, even briefly, that their relationship was built on a foundation of convenience and necessity, not genuine feeling. Mason's expression softened. "Eliza, that's not what I meant. Isn't it?" She moved to the window, needing distance. "This is exactly what the contract was designed for. Damage control for your image. It was never about me." "That's not fair," Mason protested. "Things have changed since Paris?" Eliza turned to face him. "Have they, Mason? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like we're right back where we started. Me, a business transaction. You, focused on saving your company. You know it's more complicated than that." "Actually, I don't know." Eliza's voice cracked. Because you haven't said a word about what happened between us. You've been avoiding me since we got back. Mason's silence confirmed her fears. Whatever had flickered to life between them in Paris wasn't strong enough to withstand the reality of their situation. I think I should go, she said finally. Alarm flashed across Mason's face. Go where? Home, my real home. Back to my grandfather and my old apartment. Eliza moved toward her bedroom to pack. The contract is public now. There's no point pretending anymore. Eliza, wait. Mason caught her arm. We can fix this. She gently extricated herself from his grip. Some things can't be fixed with money or legal teams, Mason. Sometimes they're just broken. The tabloids eventually lost interest in their story, moving on to newer scandals. Horizon's stock recovered after Mason announced a groundbreaking new product line. Life continued as it always did, but Eliza couldn't forget. On cold nights, she'd find herself remembering the warmth of Mason's penthouse, the intensity in his eyes when he'd asked if he could kiss her, the feeling that, for a brief moment, perhaps the pretense had become something real. Then came the storm, a fierce November gale that battered the coastline, forcing evacuations in lower-lying areas. Eliza and her grandfather stayed put, their cottage situated on higher ground. As rain lashed against the windows and wind howled through the eaves, Eliza sat by the fireplace, sketching by lamplight. A sudden pounding on the door startled her. Cautiously, she approached, wondering who would be out in such weather. When she opened the door, she found Mason standing on her porch, drenched from the rain, his expensive coat ruined and his hair plastered to his forehead. Mason, she gasped. What are you doing here? I had to see you, he said, water dripping from his face. I've been driving all night. In a storm? Eliza stepped back, allowing him inside. Are you crazy? Probably. He stood awkwardly in her small living room, looking out of place among the modest furnishings. I've been trying to convince myself that what happened between us was just circumstantial, that it wasn't real. Eliza's heart pounded as she handed him a towel. And I can't do it anymore. His voice was raw with emotion. I miss you, Eliza. Not for the contract, not for appearances. I miss your laugh and your honesty and the way you see beauty in everything. She crossed her arms protectively over her chest. Mason, your company... I don't care about the company, he interrupted. Not the way I care about you. It took losing you to realize that all the success in the world means nothing if I have to sacrifice what's real to achieve it. What are you saying? Mason took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm saying I want to tear up our contract and start over. No terms, no conditions, no expiration date. Just us, figuring it out together. Eliza's breath caught. How do I know this isn't just another business strategy? Because of this. Mason reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. It was an announcement from the business section. Mason Gray steps down as CEO of Horizon Technologies. You quit? She whispered, stunned. I stepped back. The board appointed a new CEO, and I'm taking a consulting role. A tentative smile touched his lips. It turns out there are more important things than being in control all the time. Like what? Eliza asked, hardly daring to hope. Like learning to grow orchids. Like watching sunsets from a porch instead of a penthouse. Mason closed the distance between them. Like being with someone who knows the real me, not just the image I've created. As thunder rumbled overhead, Eliza felt the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crumble. I don't know if I can trust this. Then let me earn your trust, Mason said, taking her hands in his. No contracts, no pretending. Just truth, every day, for as long as you'll have me. In the soft glow of the firelight, as rain pattered against the windows and the wind whispered through the trees, Eliza made her decision. This time, not out of necessity, but out of love. Part 5. Rewritten. Terms. Spring came to Ocean View in gentle waves of color. Wildflowers dotting the coastal paths. Cherry blossoms drifting on the breeze, and new green shoots pushing through the garden soil behind the cottage. Eliza knelt among the raised beds, carefully transplanting seedlings from her greenhouse. "You're going to get your dress dirty," Mason observed from the porch. "A mug of coffee in his hand. Wouldn't be the first time," she replied with a grin, brushing soil from her fingers as she stood to admire her work. The white sundress she wore was already smudged with earth, but she didn't mind. These days, she cared less about appearances and more about substance. Mason set down his mug and joined her in the garden, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Your grandfather is giving me that look again," Eliza chuckled, leaning back against his chest. "What look?" "The one that says, 'When are you going to make an honest woman of my granddaughter?'" "He's just old-fashioned," she said, turning in Mason's arms to face him. The last 5 months had changed him. His features were more relaxed, the perpetual furrow between his brows had smoothed, and he'd traded his tailored suits for casual sweaters and jeans. "Besides, we've only been dating for real for a few months." 5 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, Mason corrected, pressing a kiss to her forehead. But who's counting? After that stormy night when Mason had appeared on her doorstep, they'd agreed to start fresh. No contracts, no timelines, no expectations beyond honesty and communication. Mason had rented a small house down the beach, close enough for daily visits, but far enough to give them both space to navigate their evolving relationship. He'd thrown himself into coastal living with surprising enthusiasm, volunteering at the local Marine Conservation Center, learning to sail from Eliza's grandfather, and even starting a small investment fund to support local businesses affected by seasonal tourism fluctuations. Meanwhile, Eliza's career had flourished. The publicity from their scandal had unexpectedly boosted interest in her botanical illustrations, leading to a book deal with a prestigious publisher and exhibitions in galleries along the coast. Her work now hung in homes and offices across the country, including, ironically, the boardroom at Horizon Technologies, a gift from Mason to his former colleagues. "What time are we meeting the realtor?" Eliza asked, glancing at her watch. 3 o'clock. Mason's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Are you nervous?" "A little," she admitted. "It's a big step." They were viewing a property that afternoon, a Victorian house overlooking the bay, with a wraparound porch and enough space for both a studio for Eliza and an office for Mason's consulting work. It would be their first home together, chosen not out of convenience or necessity, but as a deliberate step forward in their relationship. "We don't have to decide today," Mason assured her, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Or at all if you're not ready." Eliza smiled at his patience, another change from the man who once orchestrated mergers and acquisitions with ruthless efficiency. "I think I'm ready. I just never imagined my life would take this turn." "Neither did I," Mason confessed. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be happier in a small coastal town than in a corner office, I would have laughed them out of the room. And if someone had told me I'd fall in love with the man who essentially bought me as a fake wife, I would have thought they were insane," Eliza teased. "Technically, I rented you," Mason corrected with a grin. "And it was the best business decision I ever made, even if it didn't quite work out as planned." Later, as they walked hand in hand along the shore, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The contract that had seemed so straightforward had evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated, a love that had grown slowly, authentically, despite the artificial circumstances of their beginning. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "Your old life? The penthouse, the power, the prestige?" Mason considered the question, watching the waves roll in. "Sometimes I miss the challenge," he admitted. "But not the emptiness. Not the constant pressure to maintain an image that wasn't really me." He stopped walking, turning to face her as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "What about you? Do you miss the glamour? The designer clothes, the galas?" Eliza shook her head. "Not for a second. Though I will say, that emerald dress was pretty spectacular." "You were spectacular in it," Mason corrected. "But you're even more beautiful here, covered in garden soil, completely yourself." He reached into his pocket, suddenly looking nervous, an expression Eliza had rarely seen on his face, even during their most challenging moments. "I had something planned for tonight," he said, after the house viewing. Dinner at that restaurant you love, champagne, the whole romantic scene. But standing here with you now, I can't think of a more perfect moment than this. Eliza's breath caught as Mason dropped to one knee on the sand, the waves lapping gently at the shore behind him. "Eliza Bennett," he began, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Our beginning was unconventional, to say the least. We started with a contract instead of a connection, with terms instead of trust. But somewhere along the way, the pretense became real, and I found myself falling in love with the woman who spilled coffee on my suit and changed my life forever." He produced a small velvet box, opening it to reveal not a flashy diamond, but a delicate ring with a pearl at its center, surrounded by tiny emeralds that matched the color of her eyes. "I'm not offering a contract this time," Mason continued. "Just a promise. To love you honestly, to build a life with you based on truth rather than convenience, and to thank my lucky stars every day that you gave me a second chance. Will you marry me? For real this time?" Tears blurred Eliza's vision as she nodded, her heart too full for words. As Mason slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, she thought about the strange journey that had brought them here. From a business arrangement born of desperation to a love that had healed them both.